So let's go to the mitigation things and recommendations. So for each identified type of risk, here you see two examples. There are some detailed mitigation steps described, including links to the OWASP, ASVS, CSVS, and cheat sheet chapters, if applicable. So, for example, you see the impact description, what this risk means if it unfolds the attack, how it's detected by Fragile, how the risk rules are detecting that, how it's being rated. Sometimes it's being rated as high, sometimes not, and that's also due to some reasoning described in the report. What are potential false positives? That's important to check. So it gives you a hint of what you have to check, whether it's a false positive, and that should be checked. And if that's true, then it's a false positive, possibly. How to mitigate that? That's the fixing things. And a check questions, set of check questions that can be asked whether it has been mitigated correctly. And then also very much linked in the report, you can click on many items, so it's easy to navigate in this big PDF. And here you see the identified instances of those risks. That means, including their state, many of them here are unchecked. That means you have a analysis by the risk rules where in that actual model file and what communication link these things have been identified. Also here, if you're working with the Fragile many times, then you know what's in the PDF in terms of description stuff. So then it's easier to use that Excel report being generated to navigate and scroll through and sort and slice the identified results and the risks. You have more or less the same data like risk category, technical asset, communication link, where it was identified, the type of the risk and the impact, likelihood and severity and stuff like that. And that's important for me, JSON, as simple as it is, we want to process this very same data in an automated way, and even in CI/CD pipelines, why not? So it's also created as some JSON report stuff. These are the built-in risk rules, and it's growing and growing. So different kinds of technology risks that can be identified. And here in a very simple example, it's written in Go, very simple to extend in that easy to read and understand language. Here you have the risk rule of an LDAP injection. That's a medium-sized risk rule. Some are bigger, some are way smaller. And on the left side, you see those text snippets and the categorization stuff to work and emit that in the report. And on the right side, you see the detection logic here for this built-in risk rule. So it's a little bit of model checking and looping and analyzing incoming data flows by protocol. And if a certain condition meets, then it's appending a new risk into that report. But you can also add your manually identified risks. So that means some workshops, if you're executing them, and that still makes sense. So you cannot do it on every sprint, of course, but if you have the resources to execute a human-driven, expert-driven threat modeling workshop, go for that. Definitely very important, because every time there are risks that can no tool ever identify, more on the business side, those risks. And why not track them in the same way? So that means if you're doing this and you identify some custom risks, you can also add them to the YAML file, including those pointers to, if applicable, to what kind of component or what kind of data flow it should be linked in the report, and to what severity, for example. Yeah, editing is very simple, as all IDEs understand YAML, obviously. So you do have some structure view in all those IDEs, but you can easily click and navigate in the model. And Fragile has its own YAML schema. That means you can import that YAML schema and into the IDE, and that's just one-time thing that needs to be done. And once your IDE has this YAML schema imported, then you can flag that this YAML file you're working on, a Fragile model file, should be using that imported schema, and then you get some auto-linting and some auto-completion stuff. So here I did a typo web server, and it's auto-linted in the model file then in my IDE, because it understands that's not a valid technology type. And I can start typing, and then this typical auto-completion box pops up and it shortens down while I'm typing. So that's a nice, convenient way of creating things in your favorite IDE. And you can even have some live template snippets to then just tab through and use control space stuff in some kind of Zen coding experience. And as said, the risk tracking is also inside the YAML file. So once you created your initial versions of reports and you see, okay, now it's the model that I think it should be. And then you're having a set of risks, of course, that need to be analyzed. And all of these risks, every risk has a custom ID. And these are those speaking identifiers with the add character in it. So it's grouped by what kind of category, in what kind of component, at what kind of data flow, between what other component and stuff like that. And you can either in a model macro style auto-seed the YAML file with all those new identified risks not yet tracked, so that you get a initial set of options where you can then enter your state for this risk. Default is unchecked, of course, or you can edit manually if you want. You can set a state of either being unchecked, that's the default for that risk, or in discussion, accepted, in progress, mitigated, or false positive. And that can also be flagged as this, of course. And then you can add a justification string, some reference, some date and stuff like that to keep it on the tracking side valid. And you can also group risks to assign the same state by using the wildcard thing here between those adds. But I would not recommend that because it might accidentally group more risks under that state if you missed a few that you were not aware of and it just matches the same group. Then you're funneling them into some state that might possibly not the desired one. So I usually recommend to be very specific and do it on a individual risks thing here, but you can, if you want, you can group it as well. What about bigger models? Of course. And that's still a small one. I've seen way bigger ones. But then they would not definitely no longer fit on the screen here on the slide. That's also an example model file here. But it's auto layout generated quite nicely. So there's no visual tweaks done. So it works even with way bigger that I've seen that needed to be plotted somewhere. So Threagile, being a command line interface, also can be started as a REST server. So you can just start it as a simple web server, and it has a Swagger REST API, Swagger documented REST API, that you can use it to throw in a model file and get the result out of that.